Nolan Easton didn't believe in accidents. As the founder and CEO of Easton Innovations, a cutting-edge robotics firm based in the heart of Seattle, his life was defined by systems, protocols, and predictability. Every decision he made, from the design of microchips to the hiring of senior engineers, was calculated, controlled, impeccable. And yet, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, his carefully arranged world tilted ever so slightly off balance. He had just returned home from a strategy meeting when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong in the usually quiet penthouse apartment, his daughter's laughter. Not just a chuckle, but the full-bodied, open-hearted kind he hadn't heard in what felt like months. Drawn by curiosity and a touch of concern, Nolan followed the sound down the hallway and paused at the threshold of the conservatory, a sun-drenched room filled with potted succulents, shelves of untouched books, and, at the moment, two figures bathed in golden light. His daughter Mira, 10 years old, bookish and sensitive, sat perched on the edge of the sofa, her eyes wide with wonder. Across from her sat a woman, mid-40s perhaps, with loosely braided hair streaked with gray and soft features marked by a faint scar near her left temple. She was holding a paint-smeared sketchbook and pointing to something that had Mira grinning from ear to ear. "I call it Picasso," the woman was saying with a laugh. "Because my dog walks across wet canvases, and apparently, that's considered art these days." Mira giggled. "He's like a furry artist." Nolan cleared his throat, a polite but unmistakable cue. The woman turned, her eyes meeting his with a flicker of surprise. "Oh. Mr. Easton, I presume?" She stood quickly, smoothing her cardigan. "I'm Quinn Avery. There must have been some sort of mix-up, I thought this was a creative storytelling session." Nolan frowned. "You weren't who I hired." "I gathered that," she replied calmly. "Your assistant reached out about a fill-in session for creative writing. I do part-time work at the rec center nearby, and they passed along the opportunity." "You're not affiliated with Tutor?" he asked, referring to the elite tutoring agency he had retained. "No," she said, still steady. "I haven't worked with private clients in a long time. I was a literature teacher. Once upon a time." He looked her over with a practiced eye. No briefcase. No business card. Her clothes were casual, her demeanor unbothered by the tension in the room. Most of all, she didn't carry the self-importance he'd come to expect from professional educators. Before he could say anything further, Mira interjected. "Dad, she showed me how to write a story from a drawing. Mine's about a giraffe who wants to fly." Nolan turned to her, softening. "Sweetheart, can you grab your jacket? We need to talk." Mira looked from her father to Quinn, her expression clouding with disappointment. "But I like Miss Quinn." "Just for a minute, Mira." With a reluctant sigh, Mira slipped off the couch and shuffled out of the room, glancing back over her shoulder at Quinn like a puppy being called inside from a sunlit yard. Once they were alone, Nolan crossed his arms. "I hired a tutor with credentials. A master's degree. Years of experience. Not a children's book enthusiast." "I understand," Quinn said, not defensively but with quiet grace. "I didn't come here to pretend to be someone I'm not. I just filled in because the timing worked and, well, I miss being in a room where imagination still matters." Nolan hesitated. There was something about her tone, reverent, almost wistful, that made it difficult to dismiss her outright. "I'll make sure you're paid for the session," he offered, already stepping back. "No need," Quinn replied with a gentle shake of her head. Mira was a joy. "That's more than enough." And with that, she gathered her things, an old canvas tote bag with frayed handles, a sketchbook, a pen with a chipped barrel, and made her way to the door. As she opened it, a gust of cold October air swept into the hallway, mingling with the scent she left behind, cinnamon and something floral. And then she was gone. That night, Nolan sat in the kitchen across from Mira, the silence between them broken only by the occasional clink of her spoon against her untouched cereal bowl. "Are we getting a new tutor tomorrow?" she asked without looking up. "Yes. A proper one." Mira scrunched her nose. "But Miss Quinn made me want to write." "That's more important than qualified, right?" He didn't have an answer. Or maybe he did, but the words had rusted from disuse. Later, while sorting through emails, an internal message from HR caught his attention. Subject: application error, tutor listings glitch. Apparently, a software error had allowed unscreened applicants to be sent out for fill-ins. Quinn Avery wasn't on the approved list. She hadn't even passed through the agency's portal. She'd emailed her availability directly, an old-fashioned thing to do in a tech-savvy world. Nolan almost deleted the message. Almost. Instead, curiosity, or something deeper, nudged his hand to click open her original email. The attached resume was modest, a degree in English education from a small liberal arts college, a few years teaching middle school, then a long silence followed by sporadic community work. But at the bottom of the email, just beneath her closing signature, was a line in italicized font. Former educator seeking reconnection through creative storytelling. Reconnection. The word echoed in his mind. Not just as an abstract concept, but as something painfully personal. He had never really reconnected, with life, with art, with himself, after Clara passed. And maybe, just maybe, someone else had walked into his life with the same ache. That night, Nolan found a folded note on his nightstand, written in Mira's loopy handwriting. "You forgot to ask her to come back. But I think your heart did." I could tell. For a man who didn't believe in accidents, Nolan found himself staring at the porch light longer than usual that evening. And he left it on. The morning came with a light drizzle and the soft hum of city traffic outside Nolan Easton's penthouse windows. He sat at the breakfast nook, a mug of black coffee growing cold in his hands, eyes not really focused on the email drafts flickering across his tablet screen. Across from him, Mira was scribbling in a notebook, her brow furrowed in concentration. "What are you working on?" he asked, more to break the silence than out of curiosity. Mira looked up, her face brightening. "A story," Miss Quinn said. "Writing is like painting with words. I'm making a story about a balloon that wants to touch the moon." Nolan smiled, despite himself. "And how does it end?" "I don't know yet," Mira admitted. But Miss Quinn said sometimes the best stories start without an ending. That line stayed with him all morning, through meetings and lunch breaks, as he tried to focus on quarterly reports and budget reviews. But even amid discussions of AI integrations and patent filings, his mind wandered, to Mira's laughter, Quinn's steady voice, and that strange sense of familiarity that had quietly crept in. That Saturday, Mira asked if they could go to the Fremont Market, a weekend art and food bazaar held just north of the city. Nolan, initially hesitant, relented after a long pause. He told himself it was for fresh air. For bonding. For Mira. He didn't tell himself that part of him was hoping to see someone. The market was buzzing with the slow rhythm of autumn life. Crisp air swirled with the scent of roasted chestnuts and cinnamon pastries. Vendors lined the walkways with everything from hand-knit scarves to lavender soaps and watercolor postcards. Nolan kept his hands deep in his coat pockets, watching Mira dart from one stand to the next, her braid bouncing with every step. And then she stopped. "Dad," she said, pointing across the crowd. "It's her. Quinn." She stood beneath a dark green canopy at the edge of the vendor circle, arranging small canvas boards on a wooden display rack. Her fingers moved with practiced ease, but her gaze lingered on each piece like it still mattered, like it still meant something. Nolan felt something twist gently in his chest. Mira was already running toward her. "Miss Quinn." Quinn looked up, startled at first, then relaxed into a wide, genuine smile. "Mira. What a surprise. I brought my dad," she said proudly. "He said only for an hour, but maybe we can stretch it." Quinn's eyes flicked up, and her smile softened when she saw him. "Hello again," she said, her voice calm. Nolan nodded, stepping forward. "Still not the tutor I expected." "Still not pretending to be," she replied, and there was laughter in her voice, not defensiveness. They stood there, surrounded by the quiet bustle of the market, Mira examining every painting like a miniature art critic. "These are yours?" Nolan asked, gesturing toward the display. Quinn nodded. "They're part of a project I used to run. Art therapy for children, mostly those working through grief or trauma. Painting helped them say what words couldn't." Nolan looked more closely now. The paintings weren't refined in the traditional sense, no bold colors or sweeping strokes meant for gallery walls. But they radiated something raw. Honest. Like emotions trapped in shape and shadow. One, in particular, showed a tree with half its branches bare and the other still lush with leaves. Mira leaned toward it. "This tree looks tired." Quinn nodded. "That's exactly what it was meant to be." Nolan turned back to Quinn. "You told Mira your dog paints." "Rudy," she said, chuckling. "He's got no technique but lots of passion." He allowed himself a smile. "Well, she's been talking about poetry and art more in the last few days than in the last few months combined." "I'm glad," Quinn said quietly. "Children need beauty, especially the quiet ones." Nolan narrowed his eyes slightly. "How did you know she was quiet?" Quinn tilted her head, thoughtful. "It's the ones who look at the corners instead of the center. The ones who name their cereal and give clouds backstories. They're not just quiet. They're listening differently." He didn't know why the comment hit him the way it did, but it did. Maybe because it was true. Maybe because someone had finally seen his daughter, not as a project or a problem to be solved, but as a whole, intricate person. There was a long pause, filled not with discomfort, but with understanding. The kind of pause that holds room for thoughts too big to say out loud. "I feel like we've met before," Nolan said, more to himself than to her. Quinn's fingers froze briefly over a small frame she'd been adjusting. "Maybe in another life," she said softly. But her eyes betrayed something deeper, something held in shadow. He didn't push. Not yet. As Mira flipped through a small portfolio of greeting cards Quinn had illustrated, Nolan stepped away, pretending to study a tray of beeswax candles. But his mind wasn't on scents or sales. It was on an image, blurred by time, of a porch in late summer, laughter drifting through the golden haze, and someone sitting beside him, sketching in a notebook while humming a song he hadn't heard in years. That night, back home, Mira taped something to the refrigerator. A poem. It wasn't polished or even fully coherent, but the final line was what caught him. "Poetry is when something you forgot remembers you." He stared at it longer than he meant to. Because something had remembered him. And he wasn't sure he was ready to forget again. The following week passed in a blur of conference calls, tech demos, and the kind of monotony Nolan Easton used to find comforting. But something had shifted. Or rather, someone had. Every time Mira mentioned a metaphor, every time she hummed a tune he didn't recognize, every time she picked up a pencil to write without being asked, Nolan saw Quinn's fingerprints on her spirit. And he couldn't help but wonder how someone who was never meant to be in their lives had made such a permanent mark in a single afternoon. Friday afternoon, Nolan found himself parked outside a brick building in West Seattle. A small wooden sign read, "Cedar House, Creative Recovery Workshops." Mira had fallen asleep in the back seat after school, clutching a drawing she'd made for Quinn, a giraffe with wings. He hadn't told her why they were here. Truth be told, he wasn't entirely sure himself. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and acrylic paint. The wide-open room buzzed quietly with focused energy. Adults and children sat around tables filled with pastels, sketchpads, and brushes soaking in jars. In the back corner, Quinn Avery stood tying an apron around her waist, her hair loose around her shoulders, a smudge of blue paint near her temple. She hadn't seen them yet. For a moment, Nolan simply watched. Watched the way she moved, calm, efficient, but tender. The way she guided a child's hand across a canvas instead of doing it for them. The way she made space without demanding attention. It felt like walking into someone else's memory. Or maybe his own. When she finally looked up and saw him, her expression froze, just for a breath. Then she straightened, gathering herself with quiet poise. "Nolan," she said, crossing the room slowly. "Didn't expect to see you here." He cleared his throat. "We were in the area." Her eyes flicked to Mira, now awake and blinking sleepily. "Hi there," she said warmly. Mira held up the drawing. "I made this for you." Quinn accepted the picture like it was gold leaf. "Thank you, Mira. This is beautiful." Nolan hesitated. "Can we talk?" Quinn glanced around the room. "Let me grab my break." They stepped out onto a small back patio enclosed by ivy and the fading scent of lavender. It was quiet here, removed from the creative hum inside. "You didn't tell me you ran a recovery center," Nolan said, hands in his coat pockets. Quinn shrugged gently. "I don't run it. I'm just one of the facilitators. I came here after." She trailed off, then tried again. "After I lost someone." There it was. Not just a shared presence in Mira's life. A shared history of grief. Nolan nodded. "Clara died 4 years ago. Cancer. It was fast. And slow. All at once." Quinn met his eyes with a softness that didn't pity, just understood. "I was married for 13 years, she said. He was kind. Quiet. A grounding sort of love. He passed 5 years ago. Also cancer." The air between them stilled. "It's strange," Nolan said. "How life just keeps going. You lose someone, and suddenly everyone expects you to function at 90% again. Smile. Move forward. And when you don't, they look at you like you're the broken machine in the factory line." Quinn exhaled. "That's why I paint. And why I started teaching again. There's a language in color that grief doesn't know how to interrupt." Nolan nodded slowly, looking out over the edge of the patio. "I found something last night. A song. Mira was playing it on the piano. Said you gave her the sheet music." Quinn's eyes sparkled with a trace of mischief and something deeper. "I figured she might like it. It was never officially published. Just something someone once played for me on a porch, years ago." He looked at her, really looked this time. "Was it Was it me? Quinn didn't answer right away. She pulled something from her apron pocket. A folded sheet of paper, yellowed at the edges. She handed it to him. It was his handwriting. Messy. Young. Honest. Quinn. If I don't say it, it's not because I don't feel it. I'm scared of what it means to love someone more than I love my plans. Nolan's breath caught. You kept this? I found it last month. Inside the sleeve of an old Fleetwood Mac record. I guess I was never ready to throw it away. He folded the paper carefully, like it might disintegrate if he moved too fast. I was going to propose. That summer. I even bought the ring. But I was offered the Stanford Fellowship, and I left. I know, Quinn said, not unkindly. You left quietly. Like a storm that chooses not to knock over anything, but still pulls the roof loose. They sat in silence. I never stopped wondering, he said. What would have happened if I'd stayed? Quinn smiled faintly. We were young. You thought love could wait. I thought everything else would wait for me. He laughed softly, without humor. Turns out, neither of us was right. Quinn's hand brushed over the table between them. So, what now? I don't know, he admitted. But Mira. She asked me last night if you were going to be part of our family. Quinn blinked. She said that? Not in so many words. But yes. And I realized. She sees you. Really sees you. The way I used to, before I got so good at looking past everything that mattered. I'm not sure I'm ready to be someone's next chapter, Nolan. I'm not asking you to be, he said gently. But maybe we can just sit on the porch again. For a while. No expectations. Just presence. Her eyes softened. And cookies. If I come over again, I'm bringing cookies. He smiled. Deal. They sat a while longer, not trying to fix anything. Not forcing answers. That evening, after Mira was tucked into bed, Nolan stood on the porch with a mug of tea and a mind full of music. He didn't turn on the radio, he didn't need to. In his chest, something familiar hummed again. And when he closed his eyes, he could see it, a girl with paint on her fingers, a boy with music in his veins, and the echo of something that had never truly left. The porch light stayed on that night. For the first time, not because he forgot to turn it off, but because he hoped someone might still be on their way home. It started small. A Saturday visit to the market. A handwritten thank you note left in Mira's lunchbox. A plate of oatmeal raisin cookies delivered with a note that read, "For creative brains and tired hearts." But small things have a way of growing roots when they land in good soil. Soon, Quinn Avery became more than just the woman who once walked into their home by accident. She became a fixture, a quiet force of presence and patience that gently settled into Nolan and Mira's lives like the first light of morning. No fanfare. Just warmth. It was Mira who led the change. She asked more often, "Can Miss Quinn come over?" And then, more boldly, "Can we go to Miss Quinn's house?" Until one afternoon, after school, she declared, "Miss Quinn feels like family. Not like a guest. Like someone who was always supposed to be here." That was the day Nolan stopped calling their meetings visits. One Sunday afternoon, they gathered in Quinn's kitchen. Mira was elbow-deep in flour, giggling while rolling cookie dough with a crooked wooden pen. Nolan leaned against the counter, sleeves rolled, a dish towel over his shoulder, his heart soft in ways he hadn't known it could be. Quinn was humming, a tune he didn't recognize, but that felt familiar nonetheless. "I forgot how loud a kitchen could be when it's full of life," Nolan said absently. Quinn smiled. This kitchen was too quiet for too long. It missed the chaos. They sat down later to a table that was mismatched but honest. Cloth napkins wrinkled from years of use. Plates from different sets. A chipped bowl filled with hand-whipped cream. Jude, Quinn's 19-year-old son, had come home for the weekend from college. He was tall and sharp-eyed, with a quiet confidence that reminded Nolan of a time when he himself was younger and less afraid to leap. An aspiring engineer with an artist's soul, he had inherited both Quinn's heart and her contradiction. "Mechanical engineering," Jude explained between bites. "But I still sketch to relax." "Sketch what?" Mira asked, eyes wide. "Abandoned places. Bridges. Sometimes portraits." "Did you draw Miss Quinn?" she asked innocently. He grinned. "Once. Made her look 15 years younger, though. She framed it, of course." Quinn rolled her eyes. "I earned every one of those wrinkles." The conversation flowed easily. Mira talked about school and the poetry club she was trying to start. Jude shared how he'd once missed a physics exam because he was too absorbed in sketching an old freight yard. Nolan found himself watching more than talking, not because he didn't have words, but because he didn't want to miss anything. The laughter. The glances. The comfort. After dinner, rain began tapping gently against the windows. Quinn brought out mugs of hot cocoa and lit the candles on the windowsill. Mira curled up on the couch with Jude, showing him her latest story, about a fox who couldn't speak but painted its feelings on cave walls. "She gets that from you," Nolan said quietly, sitting beside Quinn. "She gets it from being loved enough to express herself," Quinn replied. "That doesn't happen in every home." Nolan looked down. "I tried. After Clara died, I tried to keep everything together. But I didn't know how to help Mira grieve. So I buried mine. And that silence, it spread. Like fog." "She never stopped listening," Quinn said. "Even when you thought she wasn't." There was a pause, filled with the soft sounds of rain and Mira's voice reading her story to Jude in the other room. "I've been carrying something," Nolan said at last. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't open it. He simply held it between his fingers. Quinn glanced at it and stilled. "I bought this years ago," he said. "Back when I thought I had to choose between love and ambition. I didn't propose. I walked away." "Nolan." He raised a hand gently. "I'm not proposing now. That wouldn't be fair. Not yet. But I needed you to know, I didn't give this away. I just wasn't ready to wear the man who bought it. Not until recently." Quinn's eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. Instead, she reached out and placed her hand over his, not to take the ring, but to share the weight of it. "I don't want the version of you who ran," she said softly. "But the one who came back? He can sit beside me on the porch anytime." They sat that way for a while, not making promises, just honoring presence. Later that evening, after Jude left for a study session and Mira had gone to sleep in Quinn's guest room with her arms wrapped around a stuffed giraffe, Nolan stepped onto the back porch with a cup of chamomile tea. Quinn joined him, wrapped in a quilt, her bare feet tucked beneath her. They rocked side by side in two old chairs that creaked in unison. "You ever think about how unlikely this is?" she asked. "All the time," Nolan said. "And does it scare you? That we might have missed this forever?" He looked out at the drizzle falling softly over the trees. "It used to scare me. But now, I think maybe some things don't get lost. They just wait until we're ready." She looked over at him, her expression quiet and open. "And are you ready?" "I'm learning," he said. "Still slow. Still scared sometimes. But I'm not running anymore." Quinn reached for his hand and squeezed it once, firm and steady. "Then maybe we're not starting over," she whispered. "Maybe we're just starting. Now." The porch light glowed behind them, casting their shadows long and close. Neither of them got up for a long time. And that night, when Nolan finally turned off the porch light before bed, he didn't do it out of habit. He did it knowing it would be turned back on tomorrow, by someone who knew the way home. A full year passed, not like a storm, but like the tide, quiet, insistent, reshaping the shoreline of Nolan Easton's life one wave at a time. It wasn't dramatic. There were no declarations under moonlight, no tearful confessions in airports or candlelit restaurants. What happened between him, Quinn, and Mira grew in silence. It grew in packed lunches, bedtime stories, and walks through damp Seattle trails. It grew in coffee mugs placed beside each other in the morning without being asked, and in the way Quinn instinctively reached for Mira's hand at crosswalks. By spring, Quinn no longer knocked when she came over. Mira no longer called her Miss Quinn but just Quinn when she spoke to others, and sometimes, without thinking, Mom when she spoke to herself. It was a quiet Sunday morning, Mother's Day, and Nolan stood in the kitchen holding something he had been waiting a long time to give. Framed behind glass was a letter, handwritten in Quinn's neat, looping script, the one he had found months earlier tucked between the pages of an old poetry anthology. He hadn't shown her the letter until now. Not because he didn't treasure it, but because he'd been waiting for a moment that wasn't clouded by the past, one that fully belonged to the present. Quinn walked into the kitchen wearing one of Nolan's old college sweatshirts, her hair tied up haphazardly, holding two mugs, one coffee, one tea. "I told you, no gifts," she said, smiling. "This isn't a gift," Nolan replied. "It's a return." He handed her the frame. She studied the letter, her eyes flicking over words she barely remembered writing. "I never thought I'd see this again," she whispered. "I didn't even know you had it. You wrote it for a version of me that didn't exist back then," he said gently. "But I think I've finally become the man it was meant for." Her eyes didn't tear up. They didn't need to. Instead, she set the frame down on the counter and placed her hand on his chest, just over his heart. "You always had this in you," she said. "You just didn't know how to let it speak." Later, They stepped out onto the porch where Mira had arranged a Mother's Day brunch with juice boxes and toast cut into heart shapes. At the center of the table was a jar filled with wildflowers she'd picked from the park and a sign she had made herself that read, "For Quinn, who found us again." Across from them sat Jude, home from his sophomore year of college. He watched Mira with an easy affection that only came from shared understanding. Though they weren't siblings by blood, they had become family through proximity, patience, and story swapping. As they ate, Mira leaned into Quinn's shoulder and said quietly, "You don't have to do the church part or anything. But I think you're my mom now." "Like really?" Quinn froze. Not from discomfort, but from the sudden weight of something so sacred it made her breath catch. She turned slowly, cupped Mira's cheek, and said, "Then I will wear that name proudly." They spent the afternoon in gentle laughter and soft music. Jude sketched the moment, his pencil dancing across the page as if trying to trap the air itself. Then, as the sun began to dip behind the trees, Nolan disappeared inside for a moment and returned with something long and rectangular, wrapped in canvas. He unrolled it and held it up. A hand-carved wooden sign. The letters were burned into the grain. "The porch light stays on, EST. The day we returned." Quinn blinked, stunned. Mira gasped. "Can we hang it now?" "I already installed the hook this morning," Nolan said, trying to hide his grin. Quinn ran her fingers over the smooth wood, over the etched grooves that held more than just letters. They held time, intention, and the kind of commitment that wasn't about possession, but presence. "You really think it stayed on all this time?" she whispered. "I think it never went out," Nolan said, his voice steady. "I think we just weren't ready to see it again." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Nolan stayed out on the porch with a mug of ginger tea and a leather notebook balanced on his knees. He didn't write in it. He just held it, flipping through pages of lyrics, fragments, and thoughts he hadn't dared voice aloud. And then the door opened behind him with a soft creak. Quinn stepped outside, barefoot and wrapped in a worn blanket. She sat beside him without a word. "You weren't planning to fall asleep out here again, were you?" she teased. "Maybe," he murmured. They rocked in silence for a while, the only sound the soft rustle of wind through the trees and the chime of wind bells swaying from the eaves. "Do you ever think about how close we were to missing this?" she asked. "All the time," he said. "But I don't think life lets us miss the right things forever. I think it just gives us chances, quiet ones, and waits to see if we're brave enough to answer." She reached out and took his hand. "I'm scared sometimes," she admitted. "Not of you. Just of hoping again." He nodded. "So am I, but maybe this time, we hope together." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and for a while, they just breathed. Together. No more running. No more pretending that silence was enough. When Nolan finally stood, he walked to the edge of the porch and touched the wooden sign gently, like a benediction. Then, without turning around, he asked, "So, what do we build next?" Quinn's voice came soft and certain from behind him. "Whatever we want. But this time, let's build it slow." The next morning, the porch was damp with dew, the air thick with the scent of honeysuckle and cedar. Mira came outside barefoot, holding her poem journal and a bowl of cereal. She sat between them on the porch swing and read her latest piece out loud. It wasn't perfect. The rhythm faltered. The imagery was messy. But the final line silenced them both. "Love isn't the door that opens. It's the porch that waits." Nolan looked over at Quinn. She didn't need to say anything. She was already home.